Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, it is Short Story Tuesday, so I wanted to talk about some short form literature or a short story collection that was particularly interesting to me. Today's story is all about religion and friendship and Ethiopia, which I've talked about before. I am referring to What Language Is That?, which was published in the short story collection Say You're One of Them, which was written by Uwem Akpan, and that was published in 2008. For those who don't know, Uwem Akpan is a writer and also a Jesuit priest, which I think is kind of funny. Like, in addition to writing, he also ministerizes, or whatever it is the Jesuits do. He is not a Nigerian writer as well, which I don't think I've talked about any writers from Nigeria on this channel. But if I have, that's just something that I've forgotten about. But Uwem Akpan is Nigerian. He's a Jesuit priest. He's a writer. He's really only gotten two major things published: this book and a more recent book called New York, My Village, which is about more ethnic conflict, religious conflict out of Africa, and presumably going from Africa to New York. I haven't read the book, but I'm very interested in giving it a look-see, as his writing here has interested me. And what's more is he has the Oprah seal of approval, as she has proclaimed great things about his work. But in addition to getting those two things published, I think he also gets some short stories published here and there, which aren't from either of his collections. So that's interesting, and you should probably go check out those, as well as some of the ones from this book, because, spoiler, I did like the story, and I'll probably recommend it. But without further ado, let's talk about What Language Is That? I will do a brief summary, a little bit of an analysis, and we will move on from there. So What Language Is That focuses on two friends, really. One who is Christian, who is the main character. They aren't really given a name in this story. And another girl named Salam, who is Muslim, and they are living in Ethiopia, I think set during the present day, although this does mention Haile Selassie, but it references a hotel, and I don't know if they still have like hotels named after Haile Selassie, the guy they deposed in 1970. If they do have that, I wouldn't know for sure, but I think it's set during modern times. And these two friends are best friends. They absolutely love one another. They do everything together. And they frequently talk to each other through their balconies, where they develop their own sort of conversation or language that their friends. Their other friends don't really have. It's because it's an exclusive kind of best friendship right there. And so one day, the Christian friend, their parents invite Salam out to a hotel for dinner or lunch, to eat out essentially. And because the Muslim parents are so happy in this friendship and whatnot, they agree to it. But during this meal, the two friends quarrel because one of the friends, the Muslim friend, was talking to another girl who I think was also Muslim, and she they have a little bit of a spat in this public setting, and the father is embarrassed, and even the waitress comes by and says, you shouldn't embarrass your parents like this. They end up making up, which is pretty cool. But the next day, the Christian friend, the main character, wakes up and is in their parents' bedroom, and their parents are very controlling of what they can go and see, because apparently something not good has happened outside. And the parents are even like, we don't want you seeing that Muslim girl anymore, Salam, because there's trouble going on between us. And at first, the main character doesn't really agree with this because they're best friends. Why would they be separated like that? That doesn't really make any sense. She goes to her room and looks out the window and sees that there's been a bit of a riot in the neighborhood. There's still smoke and fires, and the Salam's house, Salam's apartment, has been spared in the process for uncertain reasons. But the riot has made the parents in this story, the main character's parents, a little uneasy, and they just say that they don't want any contact with that friend, which doesn't happen for a couple of days. Although the main character does dream about the friend and losing the friend, which makes her even sadder. The next day, the parents talk about moving to Addis Ababa, which I believe is the capital of Ethiopia, and they say that the main character will make new friends there, which again the main character doesn't necessarily want, because she's happy with her current friend. But finally she goes to her room and she sees her friend on the balcony, and they have a little bit of a conversation where they don't talk in words, but they're able to talk about that they miss each other and that they're both worried about what's going on in the current situation. It sort of ends on a happy note there, as they wave goodbye to one another, and the main character is somewhat happy going to Addis Ababa, even if she's leaving her friend behind. In terms of analysis, this is a pretty short story. Not a lot of events are happening in it. It's more of the idea of what's going on in Ethiopia that I think is layered in this story. But one thing that I think Uwem Akpan does particularly well is talking about religion in Ethiopia. So there seems to be a conflict between Muslims and Christians, as there are in many I'd say some African nations and some Middle Eastern countries, sectarian ethnic fighting or something like that. I don't quite understand Ethiopia's history up to the present moment. But I did read The Shadow King by Maza Mengistu, which had talked about Haile Selassie and the war that went on between Ethiopia and Italy in the 1930s, and then how Haile Selassie was deposed in the 1970s. And perhaps I think this really builds upon that history, because maybe after that revolution there was still fighting. Like there was the revolution didn't fix that there was inherent differences between Muslim groups and Christian groups in the country, and so fighting continued, which is unfortunately how it goes sometimes. The fighting doesn't need to happen, but again, like the religions are viewed as so radically different that any attempts for one group to really talk to the other is often difficult, because they don't want to communicate across those lines. And this conflict doesn't really make sense to the kids, because they're too young to understand why these two groups are fighting. At a base level, they're the same. They both believe in the same God. They both recognize some of the same figures. Although I don't think Christian religions really recognize Muhammad in any sort of way. Although Muslim religions do recognize Jesus, they just don't think he was as important as the Christians say he is. None of this makes any sense. At a base level, these two religions are the same. So why do they have to be opposed to one another? I don't think the children actually have a good answer for that. They just know that there's fighting, and that's causing a rift between their houses. And I don't even think the parents really understand it, because one day they're perfectly fine with these people. Although we haven't really seen we're told about the worries that are underlying this family, because they've seen Christian families persecuted before in Ethiopia. So maybe that's underlying the whole story for them. Like they're cautiously allowing their daughter to be friends with this Muslim girl, even though they're not quite sure what's going to happen down the road. But it's still there's no point if you're willing to live with these people for a certain amount of time, they can't be your enemy. Like, people just don't change on a dime like that unless someone from like in a higher up position is telling you. But I don't think Akpan is really getting at that. He's just trying to highlight maybe how it doesn't quite make sense why these people are viewed as enemies. And yeah, so there's this rift in houses, and I do like how Akpan describes this rift at times. There's an interesting quote from this. Allow me to read it to you. The next afternoon you came onto the balcony. Salam also appeared on her balcony. You gazed at each other without words. You followed each other's gaze to the coffee fields, to the hills, to the sun. The sky was cloudy. The street emitted a low buzz below, and 2 donkeys brayed in the distance. The winds came from the hills fresh and steady. The birds lined the wires, some facing you and others facing her in silence, as if they were awaiting the beginning of a race. And I really like that because it really highlights the rift that's growing. Like, they're both across the street from one another. Like, they have that entire street as sort of a division between them, and it seems as if nature itself is waiting for them to say something to each other, or is waiting to see what develops between these two religions, because it's uncertain times, and these kids are caught up in it. They just want to be friends, essentially. But again, like, the persecution and the conflict that is existing in Ethiopia at this time doesn't quite allow for that. And then another thing that Uwem talks about is friendship. So the main character and Salam have a strong love for one another. They hug and they have a reunion in the story a couple times, and things seem to be pretty good. Like, there's an implied friendship that has existed for quite some time that is tighter than anything else. And although people do grow out of friendships over time, at this point in life, it's incredibly strong. They have a lot in common. And so the question is, can it survive Ethiopia's tensions at the time? I do think that quote that I just talked about maybe indicates that they're becoming aware of this growing rift, that maybe their friendship can't survive it, especially if she moves to Addis, the main character moves to Addis Ababa. I don't think it's going to survive that change. That maybe being away from your Muslim friend for so long will lead you to further see that person as an enemy or as an outsider, and you can't develop friendships with people you're so far away from. It doesn't really work. So I think maybe it could survive if they were next to one another. If they lived next door, they could see that they're not so different, and you'd grow up and have intermingling among different ethnic groups, different religious groups, but not the way that the narrator's parents are going about and moving away and keeping these religions separate, because that only leads to further conflict down the road. You can see that in real life, and like you can also see this psychologically, where being apart and being kept in separate groups just leads to greater in-group, out-group mentality. But I do think that Uwem Akpan does have hope in the next generation, that this hate is a learned behavior brought about by those who came before, teaching further generations to hate. But I think that the narrator's parents were very generous or very nice in allowing their daughter to hang out with Salam, and Salam's parents as well. Like, that initial connection might be positive for the future. It's just we have to prevent like further war from happening and not allow ourselves to separate into these groups that are completely artificial in nature. And then some other things that I thought were pretty interesting was the second person narration style in this. Like, it's like you felt this way, like it's focused on the main character, like this is what happened to you and then this happened to you. And so I think maybe what it's leading up to, what Uwem Akpan might be getting at, is the idea that like all of this stuff has happened to you. What are you going to do next? What is going to be the consequence of all of this for you, ultimately maybe giving you the choice and deciding whether to continue this conflict or not. I think it's very possible that's what Akpan was going for, and I do happen to like that. And I also like how this leans on Ethiopian history. Like, Haile Selassie is mentioned in this story, but he's mentioned at, like his name is mentioned in a hotel. Like there's a hotel named after him, and I have to wonder, like, is Akpan trying to draw attention to the war or the revolution in the 1970s and highlighting how maybe the principles of the revolution of a better Ethiopia for everybody was not actually met due to this continuing sectarian ethnic conflict that leaves people devastated. So I talked a little bit more about that in The Shadow King by Maza Mengiste, which I heavily recommend you go read and then check out the video that I made for it. It's probably one of the better books that I've read this year. That I think it's a pretty solid read. Anyway, those are my thoughts on What Language Is That by Uwem Akpan, a pretty solid short story that really hurts because I have a very like pessimistic view of like what's going to happen. Like these conflicts are only going to continue, much as how they've continued for centuries. But I do hope that, much like Uwem Akpan, that the next generation is able to address these conflicts and resolve them before they spiral out of hand even further. If you read this story before, or you simply want to comment on something that I said here, do so below in the comments. Let's have a discussion about this short story collection, which is pretty good. Not only this one, but the other ones in here. They're all about family affairs and the issues at a bunch of different countries. Like he didn't just talk about Ethiopia. This is Pan-African in nature, which is what Uwem Akpan frequently talks about. So yeah, I recommend not only reading this one, but also every single one in this collection. I'm definitely going to try to see if I can check out more by Uwem Akpan in the future, because his writing is so solid, I would say. If otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about Uwem again and this short story collection. As I think a lot of people will enjoy it, especially if you're looking for something that's, non-American wise. You can find something from a Nigerian writer. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and religious travels. Farewell.